Imagine that you are standing at the very top of society. Wealth, fame, you have it all. But then everything vanishes after a single phone call. How would you handle it? That is exactly what Jennifer Lawrence went through.
When the hacking thing happened, it was so unbelievably violating that you can't even put into words. I think that I'm still actually processing.
New break in a case involving a massive invasion of privacy for some big stars.
Where a group of hackers, or maybe one hacker, we don't really know at this point. Investigators have identified a second suspect in what was referred to as the fappening.
The fappening! It's awful, gross, unethical, thieving, but also charitable.
August 31st, 2014 is a day Jennifer Lawrence will never forget. At the time, she was one of Hollywood's highest-paid stars. Her phone suddenly began vibrating non-stop. 847 missed calls. Thousands of messages flooded her lock screen. In the middle of that chaos, her agent screamed through a voicemail in a voice bordering on total panic.
Don't go online. Absolutely do not go online right now.
It sounded like reasonable advice, like yelling at someone standing in a burning house not to open their eyes and look at the flames. But human instinct is a cruel paradox. Ignoring every warning, she tremblingly unlocked her phone, opened Twitter, and in an instant, her world collapsed before her eyes. Her name was at the top of the global trending list, but not because of a new movie or a prestigious award. Right next to her name was a nude photograph of her own body, an image she had taken in the absolute privacy of her bedroom 3 years earlier. Most horrifying of all was the number beneath it, 14 million views. In that moment, the panic did not come merely from having property stolen. Jennifer Lawrence later described that feeling in her FBI interview transcripts as a complete physical and mental breakdown. She shook uncontrollably and had to stop repeatedly just to breathe as panic attacks struck. She realized that she was no longer a flesh and blood human being, but had become a digital commodity entertainment content for millions of curious strangers across the planet. But Jennifer was not alone in this tragedy. Across Hollywood, the phones of more than 100 other celebrities also began to explode. Kate Upton discovered that her most intimate honeymoon videos were being circulated. Scarlett Johansson saw her bathroom selfies become the subject of discussion on every forum. Mary Elizabeth Winstead felt as if she had been assassinated, but was somehow still breathing. Even more tragic was the case of Michaela Maroney. The stolen photos had been taken when she was only 17 years old, turning millions of viewers into criminals without their knowledge. In less than 48 hours, these images spread to 17,000 different websites. 4 victims attempted suicide because they could not withstand the pressure. An unprecedented event in the history of the internet had erupted, and it was given a bitterly ironic name, the fappening.
The fappening!
Fappening.
The fappening!
The FBI's Los Angeles field office promptly launched a top priority investigation named Operation Fappening. But when the truth was uncovered, it delivered yet another shock, one far more naked and contemptible than any Hollywood movie script. The people behind this hack of the century were not computer geniuses. They were 5 completely ordinary men, arguably even societal failures. Ryan Collins was a married IT employee with children living in a dull suburb in Pennsylvania. George Garifano was a young man still living with his parents. Christopher Brannon was a high school teacher. Edward Mayerchik was a reclusive internet addict. There was no sophisticated malware, no breach of Apple's core server infrastructure. Their only weapons were pathological patience and simple phishing tricks that anyone with basic computer skills could carry out. They sent thousands of fake emails posing as Apple security warning victims that their accounts had been accessed without authorization and asking them to verify their passwords. They exploited celebrities' technological naivety to obtain the keys to their homes. And once they had the passwords, They used a rudimentary flaw in Apple's Find My iPhone feature to download entire backups of the victims' data onto their personal computers. Ryan Collins sat in his basement watching Netflix while waiting for the progress bar to finish downloading 23 gigabytes of data from Jennifer Lawrence's phone. He was not a super criminal, just a sexually deviant voyeur with far too much free time. However, it was precisely the ordinariness of these men that gave rise to a painful question and a simmering outrage about the inequality embedded in how society and the legal system operate. Pause for a moment to consider George Garifano's record. Before his name appeared in headlines for hacking, Jennifer Lawrence Garifano had been carrying out these illegal intrusions for 2.5 years. His list of victims did not consist solely of Hollywood stars. On his hard drive, the FBI found data belonging to more than 240 other people. Who were they? Ordinary girls, former high school classmates, ex-girlfriends, anonymous women he found on Facebook. He stole their private images and violated their personal lives just as brutally as he did Kate Upton's. Yet for 2.5 years, he lived freely and undisturbed. No FBI agents knocked on his door. No Priority 1 operation was activated. Those anonymous victims, if they even realized they had been hacked and went to the police, would most likely have received nothing more than a weary shake of the head and advice to change their passwords and be more careful next time. This bitter irony exposes a cruel double-standard. Privacy no longer appears to be a fundamental human right, but a privilege reserved for the elite. When the data of a college student or an office worker is stolen and used for blackmail, it is treated as a personal risk. But when the data of a movie star is stolen, it becomes a national security crisis. The FBI mobilized its most advanced resources and its best experts to protect the dignity of the rich and famous, while hundreds of Garifano's earlier victims were left in the shadows, forced to endure their suffering alone. The fappening case beneath the surface of an entertainment scandal was in fact a mirror reflecting deep class discrimination within the justice system itself. If you have no power and no media attention, your privacy seems to be worthless in the eyes of lawmakers. But if we place all the blame on 5 hackers or on the FBI's favoritism, we miss the true culprit, the most vicious actor in this entire story. That culprit does not sit in a basement in Pennsylvania or Chicago. It is everywhere. It is the crowd. It is millions of internet users. It could be you or the person sitting next to you in a cafe. Those 5 hackers were merely the ones who struck the match. It was the online community that became the raging wind fanning the flames into an uncontrollable disaster. On the fateful night of August 31st, on the forum, Forshan, an anonymous user with the handle Original Guy, posted the first message offering these photos for sale. But he did not retain control for long. Within minutes, the images spilled onto Reddit, where a user named Johns_McJohn created a subreddit called The Fappening. And it was here that the darkest side of human nature was laid bare. Reddit nearly crashed immediately. Traffic surged to insane levels. Reddit's engineers were forced to work in emergency mode, allocating tens of thousands of dollars worth of additional server resources just to keep the site from collapsing under the weight of millions of ravenous eyes searching for naked bodies. Google Trends recorded related search terms hitting maximum levels simultaneously in 19 countries. A collective frenzy took hold in which people forgot that the women in the images were real human beings with emotions, families, and pain. The online community turned the leak into a game, a festival. They created detailed Excel spreadsheets to track which stars had been exposed and which had not, rating their bodies like merchandise in a marketplace. They built automated bots to download and repost images the moment old links were taken down. They mocked, commented on, and even attacked the victims themselves. In a later explosive interview with Vanity Fair, Jennifer Lawrence voiced a truth no one wanted to admit.
There's not one person in the world that is not capable of seeing these intimate, photos of me. I feel like, I got gangbanged by the fucking planet.
That blunt accusation was aimed directly at the conscience of every internet user. A hacker steals an image once, but every time a user downloads that image, every time they share it in a Zalo, Telegram, or Facebook group to gossip with friends, they are violating the victim one more time. A photo viewed 14 million times means the victim was stripped and assaulted 14 million times. It was the demand of the crowd that created the incentive for the hackers. Without the morbid curiosity and the willingness of millions to consume stolen content, people like Ryan Collins or George Garifano would have had no motivation to commit these crimes. We, the internet users, are not innocent spectators. We are hidden accomplices, people who enabled the crime through our cold, indifferent clicks. The case only truly changed direction when Michaela Maroney's lawyer sent a cease and desist letter to Reddit. Among the leaked images were photos taken when Maroney was under 18 years old. Possessing, distributing, or even viewing those images constituted child pornography, a serious federal felony carrying severe prison sentences. This revelation was like a bucket of ice water thrown on a bloodthirsty crowd. Reddit, terrified by the prospect of criminal prosecution, immediately shut down the Fappening subreddit and imposed a permanent ban on related content. But it was already too late. The images had escaped the control of mainstream platforms and sunk into the dark corners of the internet, into underground forums, Russian porn sites, and decentralized file-sharing networks. From a technological perspective, the Fappening was also a painful wake-up call about the fragility of so-called cloud security. At the time, Apple firmly denied that its iCloud system had been hacked, and technically, they were correct. Their core infrastructure was not breached. However, they ignored a fatal design flaw that hacker Christopher Brannon exploited to the fullest. That flaw lay in the application programming interface (API) of the Find My iPhone feature. This feature allowed users to log in to locate lost phones, but Apple failed to implement any limit on the number of password attempts. Brannon wrote a simple Python script to try tens of thousands of common passwords against celebrity accounts. It took him 1,847 attempts to discover Jennifer Lawrence's password. It took 3,221 attempts to access Rihanna's account. On a normal login page, an account would be locked after 5 failed attempts. But with this vulnerability, he could try an unlimited number of times. This was an unforgivable act of negligence by a tech giant, a flaw Apple had known about since 2012, but chose not to patch because it was deemed low risk. Immediately after the scandal, Apple quietly fixed the issue, mandated two-factor authentication, 2FA, and began sending email alerts whenever someone attempted to restore data from a backup. These changes were necessary, but they were written in the honor and suffering of hundreds of women. Legally, the case also exposed how outdated the law was in the face of rapidly advancing technology. In 2014, the concept of revenge porn barely existed in the criminal codes of most US states. Websites that shared these images hid behind Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, claiming they were merely intermediary platforms and bore no responsibility for user-posted content. The outrage sparked by the Fappening became the driving force that pushed the US, Congress, and states such as California to rush through new legislation criminalizing computer intrusion used to steal private images and tightening the accountability of social media platforms. In the end, justice was served, but it was a distorted and incomplete form of justice. The 5 hackers who were later arrested pleaded guilty. Ryan Collins was sentenced to 18 months in prison. Edward Mayerchik received 9 months. George Garofano received 8 months. Christopher Brannon, the most culpable due to his involvement with data belonging to minors, was sentenced to 34 months. In total, the men who caused this global nightmare served less than 8 years combined. A pitifully small price compared to the devastation they inflicted. But what about their victims? The sentence imposed on them was not measured in months or years. It was a life sentence. 12 of the victims permanently abandoned their careers in entertainment because they could not withstand the pressure. Aubrey Plaza developed agoraphobia, unable to leave her home for 3 months because she felt as though everyone could see through her clothes. Gabrielle Union suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder, flinching in terror whenever she saw someone raise a phone to take a picture. Dozens of others spent millions of dollars on therapy learning how to continue living with overwhelming humiliation. Those images, though removed from major platforms, still drift somewhere on the dark web in private Telegram groups, on illegal pornographic websites. They became permanent digital tattoos on the victims' lives marks that can never be completely erased. Whenever their names are searched, the risk remains that those images will resurface. The fappening was not just a hack. It was a dark milestone marking a shift in humanity's understanding of privacy in the digital age. It taught us a costly lesson. The cloud is not as safe as we think, and passwords like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or a pet's name are not enough to protect our deepest secrets. More importantly, it held up a mirror to the moral character of modern society. When technology allows us to peer into someone else's private life with a single click, do we have the strength to turn away? Or will we become part of a hostile crowd, silent accomplices in a collective crime? The story of Jennifer Lawrence and more than 100 other victims should not be remembered merely as a nude photo scandal. It should be remembered as a warning about the cruelty of the crowd and the responsibility of each individual in the digital world. When you encounter a link containing leaked sensitive data, the choice is yours. You can click it and become part of the problem, joining the 14 million people who psychologically assaulted a young woman that day. Or you can choose to respect another person's dignity, close your browser, and refuse to enable a crime. The FBI can arrest hackers and the law can imprison distributors, but no one can arrest or prosecute the conscience of millions of viewers. That trial takes place every day inside our own minds, whenever we are tempted by curiosity at the expense of another person's pain. And that is the heaviest moral verdict this hack of the century has left behind for humanity. The fappening does not merely raise questions about personal security or the morality of a few deviants. It forces us to confront a much larger and far more frightening issue: what happens when power in the digital age no longer resides in the hands of the state, but in the hands of the crowd. In the 20th century, to destroy a person, you needed power. Newspapers, courts, propaganda machines. But in the 21st century, all you need is a link and enough people willing to click on it. No guns, no prisons, no verdicts. Collective curiosity alone is enough to crush a human being. If today millions of people can simultaneously spread images of a female actor, what might they do tomorrow? If a crowd can turn a victim into entertainment, what boundary still exists to protect any of us? Extend that question beyond Hollywood. What happens if instead of nude photos, it is medical records, political affiliations, private messages, or search histories of millions of citizens that are deliberately exposed? What happens if collective outrage is not aimed at a wealthy celebrity, but at a journalist, a social activist, or a political candidate? At that point, this is no longer a hack. It is the weaponization of shame. It is the destabilization of society through data. The fappening reveals a chilling truth in the digital age: human dignity is not destroyed by the one who steals, but by the one who consumes. Hackers merely open the door. It is the crowd that rushes in, trampling, rummaging, and laughing. And the most terrifying thing is this: none of them feel guilty. Each individual can reassure themselves, "I'm just looking, everyone's looking, I'm not the one spreading it." Evil in the internet age does not require grand villains. It only requires millions of ordinary people refusing to take responsibility. That is why the final question left by the fappening is not a question for Apple, the FBI, or the legal system. It is a question for each of us. When technology gives you the power to peer into someone else's life without punishment, will you use that power as a human being or as part of the herd? Laws can be updated, security systems can be patched, hackers can be imprisoned. But if our collective conscience does not change, this will not be the last tragedy. The most important trial of the digital age does not take place in a courtroom. It takes place in a fleeting moment, the moment you decide whether or not to click on a link. And the verdict of that trial is not for the victim. It is for us.